Hello, everyone. It has been an honor working alongside each and every one of you throughout this course. I chose to discuss Chapter 2, A New Kind of Faith, from Larry Hurtado's Destroyer of the Gods, Early Christian Distinctiveness in the Roman World. Hurtado begins his discourse by introducing a modern terminological fallacy surrounding our cultural understanding of the word religion, and how that can impact a proper exegetical analysis of New Testament scriptures. Hurtado explains on page 39 that the generic concept of religion as basically similar feature of human cultures across time actually emerged in European thinking. In comparison, he goes on to elucidate through detailed semantic discussion of somewhat commiserate terminology constituting certain aspects of religion. But it is not even clear that ancient Greek or Latin or other ancient languages had a term that corresponded directly to the modern concept and uses of the term religion. Before this discussion, I was unaware and did not recognize that my view of the term religion was different than other cultural understandings. However, following his unique argument, Hurtado has rid my further exegetical studies of the cultural blinder I had unknowingly been wearing and injecting into Scripture. The author then argues on page 42, the modern concept of religion as well comprise developments that actually separate us from the ancient setting and can make it difficult to engage that setting accurately. I could not agree more with the author here. However, while certain aspects of his discussion of religion were needed to further his argumentation regarding the lack of compartmentalization of religion in the Greco-Roman worldview, other areas like his continued discussion of European colonization were not entirely needed. While the reader needs to understand the roots of a Christian master model through the European lens, his added discussion of colonization categories is somewhat of an excursus. Comparatively, Hurtado explains on page 39. Traditional religions, he speaks of classical Theravada, Buddhism, and Hinduism here, of various people seem as much or more to do with keeping potential spirit dangers at bay and avoiding offending them, rather than worship and adoration of, and a positive relationship with, a deity as conceived, for example, by Christians. However, is this not like the ancient Roman view of religion? Hurtado recognizes the mutually convenient relationship between an ancient Roman and their deities, adding people wanted, and by the way, if you just heard that, that's Dashy, that's my little miniature weenie dog, and their deities, adding people wanted things from their deities and the deities liked gifts, so referencing the gods involved a significant part of life. He could have added to one of the main emphases, one concerned with the past and one with the present. While Hurtado could have further connected this point within chapter 2, the author does balance antiquity and modernity extremely well. He acknowledges on page 76, early Christianity represented a new kind of what we would call religion, something that had not been seen before and something that proved revolutionary in what religion came to mean thereafter. Christianity influenced the socio-cultural understanding of religion, and Hurtado sees the significance of its institution, somewhat comparable to Judaism and unlike Rome, and inclusion, more comparable to Rome than the Jewish ethnos. One of my favorite components of this chapter was Hurtado's discussion of religion through the Greco-Roman lens. Since I'm a neophyte in background studies, especially the world of the New Testament and Greco-Roman mythology, this portion of Hurtado's text was critical. The world full of gods portion is where Hurtado's previous examination of religion and his overall thesis shines through. He then states, this is particularly where the religious beliefs and stance of early Christianity stand out as different. Christians were expected to avoid taking part in the worship of any deity other than the one God of the biblical tradition. Additionally, he likens the religious Roman world of the New Testament authors that they would have been distinctly aware of as a cafeteria of gods. Hurtado's humorous additions were another area I appreciate when reading his argument, as it reawakens the learning community in his reader. This chapter is interconnected, somewhat resembling a chain. As Hurtado first discusses the religiosity and cognitive environment of the Romans, with a strong emphasis on the infiltration and omnipresence of religion in the fabric of ancient life, especially imperialism, he then transitions the conversation to the material and physical representation of their religious thought life. Consequently, the immensity of idolatry was yet another obstacle early believers, especially Gentiles, faced, further solidifying the author's thesis of Christian distinctiveness. He adds, it would have been difficult for Christians simply to avoid all such rituals without being noticed. Christians likely often had to refuse to join in the worship of the various divinities, and so had to negotiate their relationships carefully, especially, no doubt, those involving family and close acquaintances. In stark contrast to the polytheistic religions of the Roman Empire, Hurtado adds what was generally considered piety, religio or eusebia, reverencing the many gods, was for early Christians idolatry and piety of the gravest sort. When a Christian refused to worship Roman idols, it was a ripple effect, beginning in the lares, household divinities, to the tutelary deities of cities, moving outward to the traditional gods of cities and peoples comprising the Roman world, and the deities like Roma personifying the empire itself, which conferred legitimacy to Roman rule. Therefore, the believer would have been seen as rejecting the heart of every Roman, from the home to their city, emperor, and finally their deity. The only weakness I could unearth in this section of his text is his lack of variety in New Testament authors. Hurtado only seems to use the Apostle Paul, who is a needed and dominant source, but I feel that he could have utilized other biblical authors. Given his discourse of idolatry, the book of Acts would have illuminated his study further. In addition, he seems to only discuss the word idolaion on pages 51 to 52. However, he could have utilized other terms for idolatry used by other biblical authors, like charigma, which is used mostly in Revelation. The biblical author uses, I'm going to attempt to say this word, maskomeo in Acts chapter 7, verse 41, meaning to make an idol in the shape of a calf. Eidolon in chapter 15, verse 20, which is translated as idols in Acts, and charigma in chapter 17, verse 29, which is a carved, graven image. Another interesting facet of Hurtado's discussion was the distinctiveness of the Jews in comparison to Christians concerning the same subject as Roman idolatry. He explains on page 53, the difference between Jewish monotheism is how Christians were not seen as an ethnos, a nation. The early Christian circles, such as those addressed by Paul and reflected in subsequent Christian texts, were often or even dominantly what Jews called Gentiles, that is, non-Jews or former pagans. However, as he showcases, the ethnos of Christianity is a shared adoption into the family of God, which comprises all peoples, tribes, nations, and languages. One of Hurtado's most poignant quotes for the chapter is found on page 53, which says, 1 month or even 1 week earlier, perhaps, they could have been joining family and friends in sacrificial rites to various deities. But then, after embracing the sort of message that Paul preached, after being baptized as adherents of the local Christian church, they were to desist from this activity totally. Hurtado catapults the reader into the lives and socio-religious cognitive environments of those comprising the early Christian movement, ancient Romans, and Jews in Roman Judea. His work is brimming with poignant imagery and literary mastery depicting ancient Roman religious practices and how they connect to the contemporary Christian ideology surrounding New Testament background studies. Thank you again for your kindness and support throughout this course. I enjoyed learning alongside each of you and pray for your continued callings and endeavors to proclaim the gospel to the ends of the earth.